If you think you could never be vegan, you're in the right place. And if you think there's something big that you'd really like to do, but it's probably too late, you're in the right place. My name's Michelle Olander, and I think there's never been a more important time to move in a vegan direction. So I'm here every week to cheer you on and see if I can help you veg your best. Episode 161, Cognitive Distortions. So, Veg Your Besties, welcome back. If you follow me on Instagram, which is also called Veg Your Best, our account on Instagram, you may have seen my reel that I posted when I myself was reeling from having just finished a really fun interview over Zoom with Carly Puck from Consciously Clueless podcast. You know, she has such a good podcast, and Carly was so good. She was so interesting during our interview. And I finished, and I was so delighted, and I was looking forward to the next thing that I was going to do before the end of the day. And I opened up Dropbox, which is where I save the audio files. I save them to Dropbox, and then I share them to my sound guy, Charlie. And I was looking down as I'm doing this, and I thought, huh? I don't think it was anything more intelligent than that. Huh? Maybe it looks different, I was thinking. Maybe there's something different because of the update I did on Zoom, and then I updated my Mac, and then I started to realize with a level of gathering horror, and I know, yes, that's an absurd overstatement, given the horrors that exist in the human and earthly experience. But for sure, I was feeling sick to my stomach as I started to realize I must not have hit the record button. I must not have. And I double-checked files, and I will spare you, I'm going to spare you the blow-by-blow, real-time panic and flailing and bargaining with my higher power. And it wasn't even like I had showed up at the last minute to record. You know, I had logged on 30 minutes early to double-check my microphone levels, especially because I didn't like the sound of my microphone on a recent episode. And I cannot believe that my fear finally came true. I didn't hit record. And everyone I told about it, everyone said the same thing. Yeah, I know. Yeah, that happens. Go for a walk, shake it off. And I'm like, wait a minute. Are you kidding me? Did you just hear what I said? I said I invited someone to be on my podcast, and they took time out of their schedule, and they were great. Carly, Consciously Carly is her website. Consciously Clueless is her podcast. She was great, and I forgot to hit record. I must have. And how can that be okay? And yeah, it happens to just shake it off, Michelle. Right? Doesn't it mean that I'm a flake and an embarrassment and have no business doing this podcast and I should be ashamed? And this is so typical of me. And finally, everyone gets to see how unprofessional I am and no one will ever trust me again. And I'm going to end up living under a bridge down by the river. Anyway. So there was this mismatch between my feelings about myself and what had happened and almost everybody else's blasé comments that was like, yeah, just life. Well, it occurred to me it wasn't just life for me this week. But in this kind of, that time-honored attempt to self-soothe by making lemonade out of lemons. Whatever the phrase is. I'm upset, y'all. I guess I'm so upset I just said y'all. That's not me either. So anyway, getting back to it, this might be the right day to do a podcast about when things go wrong and a good opportunity to discuss cognitive distortions. Cognitive distortions are liable to sweep you up when you've had a goof up, a problem, a mistake. And these very common, I would say they're even garden variety ways that our brain will get us to interpret what's going on. And yes, it's true. We are making up the meaning of events and people and things around us all the time. But cognitive distortions are these sorts of irrational and biased ways of thinking that distort our perception of reality. And they're patterns. They're patterns. Typically, you or I will have one of these that we tend to do more than others. It's a groove in our brains when things go wrong. And the pattern of thought is usually unhelpful and maladaptive. And they tend to reinforce some old, pre-existing negative thoughts and emotions that we've been carrying around for a long time. And there's nothing lethal about these. I mean, cognitive distortions are just very common things. We all do some of them, and they can influence a range of decisions, a range of behaviors and choices. They really tend to spread out over what we're doing and create an overarching explanation of what went wrong. And usually it's something's wrong with you. Something's wrong with me. But whether it's our interpretation of our personal worthiness, our professionalism, or our belief in our own focus and discipline, those are mine. Those are always mine. They can actually start to make us believe that certain things are just not possible for us based on one thing, 10 things, something somebody said. Now, these cognitive distortions are often showing up on this podcast as we talk about practicing a vegan lifestyle or a plant-based lifestyle. Cognitive distortions can make it harder for us to make those vegan choices consistently. And I don't think that what keeps us from going vegan or plant-based when we say we want to is really that much different than what keeps us from doing anything we say we want to. It's the same disconnect that occurs anytime we feel stuck or inept or unsupported or not suited to a particular lifestyle or choice. And when we're stuck, when we're upset, when we're feeling unmoored, I think it's a really good opportunity to see if we are in the thrall of one of these cognitive distortions. Now, some of the most common cognitive distortions that might make it difficult for someone to transition to a vegan lifestyle or to take on any new challenge are the following ones, and I'm going to list them, and then I'll talk a little more about each of them. So let's see. I have notes for this part, so I remember to get all of them. Black and white thinking, sometimes all or nothing thinking, overgeneralizing. Number 3, mental filters. 4, discounting the positive. 5, jumping to conclusions. 6, catastrophizing. 7, emotional reasoning. 8, shoulding or should statements. 9, labeling and mislabeling. And 10, personalizing. Now, number 1, all or nothing thinking, viewing things in absolutes. Absolute terms like, I ate cheese today, so I have completely failed at being vegan. Or I didn't press record on today's Zoom recording, and so even after having published 160 episodes and recorded many more than that, I am a failure. All or nothing, good or bad. That's all or nothing. Number 2, overgeneralization. Drawing conclusions, general conclusions from a single incident or a single piece of evidence. If one tried a vegan meal and didn't like it, for example, they might think, oof, all vegan food is terrible. Now, I hear this from people all the time who went to a vegan restaurant once in 1976. But I also hear it from newer vegans who are having trouble with some new cooking techniques or certain foods that they're not used to. And they are sure that because they're not getting compliments from their family members and that it just means, no, it's not going to work. I tried it already. Number 3, mental filter. And this is focus, right? This is focusing exclusively on the negatives and filtering out the positives. For instance, maybe only considering the challenges of veganism and overlooking when it's pretty easy. Sometimes I hear folks say, I can't do a vegan challenge this month because look, it's October, right? Almost Halloween. And then there's Thanksgiving and then the holidays, and I'm going to a wedding in January. The mental filter has us noticing the 10 or 12 or however many dinners or parties that seem really daunting, and not the other maybe 250 or more meals that are not special occasions over the next 90 days. So that's a mental filter. Number 4, discounting the positive. That's obvious, right? That's rejecting positive experiences by insisting, that doesn't count. Yeah, I might have saved some animals. I might have made choices that were good for the earth, but that it doesn't really make enough of a difference. Forget about it. Discounting the good things, the positive things that have happened. Or in my case, what difference does it make that this is the first time in 3 years I forgot to hit record on an interview? And as an aside, can I just thank the marvelous podcasters and artists and professionals who have reached out to me today to tell me their own tech fails when they saw my self-pitying reel on Instagram. So, discounting the positive. Number 5, jumping to conclusions, making negative interpretations without actual evidence. Just, for example, something like believing that being vegan is just going to be too difficult, assuming what others might think about your decision without having actually asked them. How many of us, myself included, how many of us thought that being vegan was essentially impossible? So for a long time, I didn't even try. Sometimes we think about how awkward it will be in order to order something or to ask a colleague or a family member about it or stand up for what we really do want. We conclude ahead of time this will be impossible, and then we don't even get the experience and the ability to learn how to cope on those occasions when things don't go well. Jumping to conclusions. That's number 5. Number 6, magnification or catastrophizing. A classic. This is very, very good. This is one of mine. Blowing things out of proportion or inappropriately shrinking something to make it seem less important. Now, for example, thinking that occasional mistakes in a vegan diet are catastrophic failures and mean that you're just unable to do it. Sometimes it's a response to when you feel that people are minimizing your situation and you double down. You double down on how bad it is and they don't get it. We may notice we're catastrophizing when we're thinking words like always, never, like I will always be unfocused. I will never be good at this. Number 7, emotional reasoning. And that's believing that because you have a feeling, some sort of a feeling, that it must be just true. That feeling must be true. One thing I know a client said to me at one point was, I feel guilty about eating animals, but I also feel deprived without eating them. So going vegan probably isn't right for me. That is emotional reasoning. That actually makes sense from an emotional point of view. But if you interrogate yourself even the smallest bit, you'll know that actually makes no sense. But when we have a feeling, it can just seem true. For example, I get tense when I have to order in a foreign language. So at one point I would think, obviously I'm not going to be able to handle this. That's impossible. I will not be able to travel in France or in Italy and be vegan because it feels so awkward and hard. Well, that's just a feeling. It's an emotional reasoning. And there are ways of working with those feelings cognitively to figure out what is possible when you have these strong feelings. Number 8, should statements. And that's trying to motivate yourself with things like shoulds and shouldn'ts, as if you need to be punished or rewarded. I should be vegan or else I'm a weak person. One of my most downloaded episodes, actually, was number 58. It's called, Is Your Diet Full of Should? I think most of us have caught ourselves saying should and noticed that it wasn't really true. Just another cognitive distortion. Labeling, number 9, labeling and mislabeling. Now, this is an extreme form of overgeneralization where you attach a label, a negative label, to yourself or to someone else, basically calling names. I'm a failure because I couldn't stay vegan, or I'm so disrespectful to my podcast guest for not having pressed record, calling names. And number 10, personalization. And I'm wondering if any of these are standing out for you, my Vedge besties, that one as being more of a recognizable distortion, that your go-to cognitive distortion, if you will. Number 10 is personalization, and that's assuming responsibility for things that are actually outside your control. For example, somebody saying, but if I don't go vegan, then all the problems related to animal agriculture are my fault. Or if my podcast is terrible, it puts all of veganism in a bad light. It's important to assert your own power, but it is a distortion when we focus on ourselves as ruining things for other people. Now, long story short, long podcast short, anytime we're brave enough to do new things, anytime we're brave enough to be creators, anytime we're brave enough to try and fine-tune our choices or to be public, we will have failures and hiccups and challenges and awkward interactions. It's just gonna happen. It's just how it is. And whether it's adopting a vegan practice or building your business or being a podcaster or an advocate, it's so important to recognize when these cognitive distortions are popping up and challenge them. And that doesn't mean that it feels fine when you have those challenges and failures. It doesn't. It doesn't. Believe me, I did not feel good today. But it's important to notice when our brains have slipped into one of these distortions so we can slow it down. So we can ask ourselves, is it really true that I'm a terrible podcaster? Is it really true that I am disrespectful to my guest? Is it really true that I'm doing a disservice to veganism by having messed this up? Because believe me, I felt all of those today. Now, there is a way, I know, to minimize feeling bad, and I've used it. I have used it, and that's to play it really safe, to stay in hiding, to remain well within your comfort zone, to only do what you absolutely know and to avoid being seen. And there is a big evolutionarily developed part of your brain, of my brain, of all our human brains, that associates embarrassment and judgment and failure with being shunned. And human beings need other human beings, especially in our early evolutionary days. We needed human beings To be shunned would be to be in terrible danger. Now, I will put the specific cognitive distortions that I mentioned in the show notes for this episode. And I often write a little something extra on the topic of the weekly podcast, and I put it in the weekly email we have. I call it a V-mail. It comes out on Thursdays, and I send to subscribers. And you can subscribe to that if you are interested. There will be a link in the show notes. So you could look at these cognitive distortions on a different day and maybe think about which ones apply to you, your go-to cognitive distortion. Okay, kids, notice this week. Notice when you find yourself slipping into one of them. When you're telling the story of what happened in a way that is condemning you or shaming you, because it ends up distracting you. That's the main problem, distracting you that you're bad or that you're a failure, rather than what there is to learn, what there is to do next, what system, I'm all about systems this fall, right? What system didn't work? Where was the chink in the armor? I changed an automatic record setting on Zoom this fall when I recently set up a new calendar link for booking podcast guests. And you know what else? I also used to have a Post-it note on my laptop that said, hit record. Now, until today, it's going back on. But for the last few months, that hit record Post-it note has not been on my laptop. And that system is changing today. So that's an easy fix. And if I'm berating myself, I'm not looking for what there is to learn. Now, hopefully, Carly Puck from Consciously Clueless podcast will forgive me and will give me another hour again in the near future of her time, because she is really a terrific young woman. I know you will enjoy her. She's such a good communicator, lively and committed and thoughtful. And in the meantime, I hope you'll all check out her podcast, Consciously Clueless. Okay, kids, until next week, I hope that you will think about what sorts of distortions your brain typically offers you when you've had a snafu. And in the meantime, just veg your best. Veg Your Best podcast production, music, and editing by Charlie Weinshank. Thanks, Charlie. Before you go, it would mean so much to me and the Veg Your Best team if you would hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, or share with someone you think might be interested. Something about algorithms, it helps bump us up a little in the rankings, and that's the best way to help others find the podcast and for us to find our audience. So, until next week, make it easy and veg your best.